our topic today is From Resentment to Resilience. If you were here last week, you'll know that we had a really cool speaker, Crystal Catalan, who is the Inclusion and Diversity Director at a school nearby. And they spoke on a lot about restorative justice, some really great messages on restorative justice, and particularly one of the things that happens she spoke about her experiences in prison ministry, and one of the things that is sort of required for restorative justice to occur is that you are capable of seeing what we Unitarian Universalists call the inherent worth and dignity, even in people who have behaved in really quite terrible ways. And just that deeply spiritual practice of being able to open your heart to the humanity in someone, even when they seem to have lost sight of that humanity themselves. So it was a really cool service. I'm so glad I tuned in from home. And then at the end, there was time for questions. And the question that came up, which seems to me to be the obvious question to come up, was, I love this notion of seeing the inherent worth and dignity, seeing the humanity, and I also wish that Putin would drop dead. Is that hashtag relatable to? I was like, that is such a relatable question. So it really inspired how I went about preparing this morning's talk. Usually in the springtime, I just recycle the same themes. They seem to work pretty good. And so instead of having to come up with new themes, the theme for March is Rise Up. Because it's like, oh yeah, the earth. There's a song in our hymnal, probably easier than Fierce Unrest, but it's, lo, the earth awakes again. And probably a hallelujah. Anyway, there's that feeling in the springtime. And so I was like, oh, okay. Often I love, if I can, to spend some time inquiring into how we can be with our more challenging emotions that rise up in us, emotions like anger. In traditional Chinese medicine and Taoism, which I am an initiate into, they feel that anger is the energy of rising. It rises up in your body, compared to like grief that kind of sinks down, or worry that kind of goes like this and ties you in knots in the middle. So resentment to resilience, it was to be about how can we sort of be with these strongly rising feelings when we're kind of peace-loving, groovy, understanding types of folks. And then as 2022 pulled a 2020 on me, as usual, in my best planned services, there are just countless events that if we weren't to talk about them together in sacred space, I would have to wonder why we were coming together at all. So, the plan of, well, let's just talk about how to be with our resentment. Today, we also need to talk about things like hatred and vengeance, and how do we take those onto the path as people who hold like our sixth Unitarian Universalist principle. If you haven't figured it out lately yet, that's my favorite one, which is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. So what happens when you get to that question, I want to see the inherent worth and dignity, the beauty, the humanity in every soul, and this particular tyrant, this particular abuser, it would probably be better for the world if they weren't in it anymore. And I feel that in my heart at the same time. Do you ever get a sense that, like, they talk about your moral compass, right? And I think that moment is one where it's kind of like the moral compass needle is like, where did somebody put a magnet on this thing? Like, I can't quite get my moral compass to go because we have these aspirations for peace and harmony and kindness, and those feel very right. And then we also have, I'm just going to say darker or maybe more challenging feelings coming up in us, and they also have a sense of rightness to them. And so we're trying to navigate how exactly, like, what's my most ethical stance? What's my most ethical way of thinking when these things rise up in us? So that's our plan for today. Let's see how we do. Our moral compass going awry can be a very stressful and confusing situation. But my hope today is to give us an ethical GPS upgrade. I mean, compasses are kind of outdated anyway. So we're going digital in the ethical realm and see if we can learn to navigate these confusing situations when things rise up in us. All right. Anger, as you may know, can be very useful in the moment when we have the capacity to act. Anger can be very useful in the moment when we have the capacity to act. It's this energy that rises if you know what to do. Has anybody ever had this blessing? You knew exactly what to do, and you were so mad that you went and did it. You overcame the inner resistance, and you're like, there I go. I'm going to go blockade something. I'm going to go vote. I'm going to make there's no petition that exists. I'm so darn mad. I'm going to make a petition. Anger is very valuable in those situations. But the reason I chose resentment in the title was not only because it's alliterative with resilience, and that just feels good. Talk moral compass, no problem with alliteration. That feels great in there. But because when we get into things like resentment, like when they're kind of smoldering, or we don't know what to do, or we don't have a path of action, most of the time, these more challenging, rising emotions tend to weaken us, embitter us, and instead of making us more adaptive, they tend to sort of break us down inside. This is one of the reasons why it feels so bad. Even before the current tragedy that is happening in Ukraine, and whatever grief or anger we might be feeling about it, there has been plenty in the last number of years to feel resentful about. Has anyone noticed this? I'll self-identify. There are plenty of opportunities to feel resentful. You know, oh, so-and-so didn't show up for this. Oh, the nation in general did this. Oh, my county, my city, my community. There are plenty of opportunities to get resentful. And it's also a time when we need to be as resilient as possible. So I think it's very timely to work on finding out how do we move from resentment that can break us down and is so abundantly available to the resilience we need to build ourselves back up to face the actual challenges which are making resentment so available. So the problem with resentment gives us the illusion of good boundaries, but often with the side effect of making us brittle rather than more truly adaptive. Resentment gives us the illusion of good boundaries, but usually with the side effect of making us more brittle rather than more adaptive. Mother Nature wants us to be as resilient as possible. So there's a little bit of a mystery in here. Why would we have, and we know, if you have anger about stuff that you can't do anything about, you pump out these stress hormones into your system. They're like pro-inflammatory and they take your immune system down. If you can do something about it, the anger actually ramps up your immune system. The body is like, oh, we're about stress. Let's put everything we've got. But that's supposed to be a little spike. Like, thank goodness that Omicron thing with a little spike and then, everything goes back to normal. But when we're stewing in that, it ceases to be upgrading and starts to downgrade us. It's kind of a mystery. I thought our instincts were supposed to be making us adaptive. Mother Nature wants you to be resilient. She wouldn't have preserved instincts that didn't have utility to them. Definition, the capacity of a strained body. Oh my gosh, relatable. Does anybody feel like a strained body? Okay, the capacity of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation caused by, especially by compressive stress. Okay, this is the physics definition, but I really relate to it. I feel like I've been deformed by compressive stress for a little while. And second definition, an ability to recover from or easily to misfortune or change. So this is what we're going for. We're going for the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And I'm going to argue today that while uncomfortable, while not very useful the way we normally engage with them, our darker, more challenging emotions that rise up in us are actually trying to produce greater resilience. The thing to know about resilience is that what it's not, you don't see anywhere in this description, the static state that you will come to one day when all your ducks are in a row, right? That's not the definition, at least in Merriam-Webster's, of what resilience means. It's a dynamic thing that happens. Misfortune and change still come, and your compressed body, whatever, compressed, stressed thing, strained body has the capacity to recover or adjust easily to misfortune or change. This is what we're going for. So as you feel into it, you can probably start to intuit where my punchline is going to go. That what these emotions are trying to do is give us the requisite energy to adjust properly to the changes that are taking place around us. So it's a very dynamic thing. And it actually reminds me of that sixth Unitarian Universalist principle. I'll say it again because it's my current fave. The goal of world community is peace, liberty, and justice for all. And when I hear the word peace, it kind of reminds me of that, like, oh, all the ducks are in a row, and we can sit there beaming well wishes out into the world because all is well. But when I hear the word justice, it gives me a much more dynamic sense of things. There's, the symbol of justice. I'm a Libra, so obviously I like justice. The symbol of justice is the weighing scales. It's a sense of balance. And I want to propose to you that it's a sense of dynamic balance. Okay. Peace seems too static, but justice gives that implication of a dynamic balance. So let's dive into darker emotions. To forgive is human. Okay, on the cutting room floor, the title for this sermon, somebody asked me, I mentioned forgiveness in passing in a previous talk, and somebody asked me, can you talk more about forgiveness? And I was like, that's cool. And I was researching forgiveness because I wanted to see beyond just what we have to say about it, kind of moralistically, to err is human, to forgive is divine, or all of these shoulds that we've inherited. I want to see, is there a biological basis for forgiveness? Is forgiveness good for you? Is it adaptive? So, I used the handy dandy internet, and what I found was not what I was looking for, but really, really cool. So the working title, I was like, oh, what if I gave a sermon called The Neurobiological Adaptations of Forgiveness and Rage in Homo sapiens? Well, you got from resentment to resilience. But this is what I found on the good old internet. It was really cool. And what they talked about was that forgiveness, the theory goes, in Homo sapiens bands, the adaptive quality of forgiveness is that sometimes it's better to not create the enmity of punishing someone so that you can have greater cohesiveness in society. Right? In the old bands, somebody does you wrong, what do? You punch them, or you try to get a band together and you kick them out or something like that. But what if they're the only one who knows how to run the lights? Then, you're kind of constrained. And so what they theorize is that there's this internal calculus that's going like, okay, if I punch them, they won't do the lights for me. But can I forgive them? What they brought up, though, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, because the adaptive benefits to forgiveness are overshadowed by the need to actually ostracize someone from those early primate bands. If you have a repeat offending abuser, if you have an early primate sociopath, they found that keeping them in your band has detrimental effects on the cohesion and the adaptiveness of your group. Now, in modern times, of course, I mean, that could get a little severe. We do have this idea of restorative justice, but we have it because we are modern people with more resources at hand. In the olden days, though, what's really cool is that you start to note that for a human being, when it comes to, do I go toward forgiveness or do I go toward vengeance? There's actually this complex internal calculus going on. And the question down underneath it, the actual instinct toward vengeance and the instinct toward forgiveness is, what is most going to benefit my community? So it's a really interesting question. And this is the first little key that I want to throw at you. If your mind comes to one of these fool's choices, the fool's choice in this case is, should I forgive, be a bigger person, or should I stay mad? Okay, I think that's not a very adaptive question. An adaptive question would be, what action is going to be of most benefit to my community? This is the underlying question that we're trying to answer by weighing forgiveness or vengeance. Okay, so this is forgiveness, and it starts to paint the picture of why these urges to lash out, urges to embrace, might be creating the paradox that it is to be a human being. But the one I really wanted to talk about today is in German. I already tried to speak Zulu, now I will try to speak German to you. Schadenfreude. Yeah, did I say it right? Schadenfreude? I think I said it right. Okay, good. So just one tangent. I just learned a different German word called Freudenfreude, which is the opposite, where that's where you take joy in another's joy. And I don't know why I just like saying it in German, Freudenfreude. Oh, you're happy? I have Freudenfreude for you. Anyway, Schadenfreude is the opposite of that. Excuse me. And it means taking pleasure in another's misfortune or pain. Taking pleasure in another person's misfortune or pain. Okay, so obviously none of you ever experienced this. You're fully enlightened Unitarian Universalists. You've joined with the universal, and so Schadenfreude is not a thing for you. But the rest of us humans, I'll admit, we see, I don't know, like a rabid COVID denier get COVID, and you're kind of like, oh gosh, man, I hope you don't tell people to take their masks off now, buddy. And rather than, it's another one of those moral compass moments, right? Because something in there feels like we're vindicated. Something feels ethical about that too a little bit, right? And then another part is like, hey, buddy, calm down. This is not what you told all those people last Sunday that you were about. So you better calm it right down. Okay, so Schadenfreude, another piece of research, really inspiring to me. I started reading Brene Brown's latest book. It's called Atlas of the Heart. She goes into the experience of Schadenfreude, and she presents this neat piece of research that's pretty recent, which is they hooked some folks up into a fMRI. I'm going to totally oversimplify this. Any of you adaptive neurobiologists out there, please don't come for me after the show. Hooked them up into the fMRI. I'm still doing an EEG cap with my hands, but they loaded them into the fMRI, right? And then had folks concentrate on something that brought up this feeling of Schadenfreude for them. And what they noticed is while indulging in Schadenfreude, it at the same time turns off the empathy centers of your brain. That's the oversimplification. I didn't look up whether it was your left temporal gyrus or whatever, but the empathy centers, blame Brene if it's not specific enough for you. So while experiencing, it makes sense though, right? If you're like, oh, wow, you were the president and you said COVID was a hoax and now you got COVID. Oh, there he is. While you're doing that, it's impossible to be feeling with another, right? We have to shut off the capacity to feel with in order to rejoice in another person's pain. Okay, this is very, very interesting to me because we can see why our conscience, if we understand that one little piece of information, you might see why your conscience has a sense of trepidation when you're feeling Schadenfreude. Because empathy, as you learned 2 weeks ago with me, is step one in generating compassion. One of the most adaptive feelings that a human can generate. All of our pro-social impulses, all of that stems from having a brain that's capable of empathy. And I believe we intuit, our conscience in there is an intuition that the more we erode that, the less we're going to be able to go to that, both society building, but restorative aspect of ourselves, which is empathy. But what about the other part of our moral compass? What about the part that says, but wait, something also feels right. When I'm feeling Schadenfreude, something also feels right. And there's research on this as well, which says you may actually be rejoicing in the thought of accountability. And the interesting thing is that rejoicing in the thought of accountability is actually empathy with the oppressed or with the abused. So just take that in for a minute. We do have an instinct, right? Unrefined, these don't always go very good places, but somebody abused your friend and they fall down and skin their knee, something lights up in you, right? And we have the option to go to Schadenfreude, which erodes our capacity for empathy, but we also have the option to realize that we are feeling that way because we have empathy for those who were abused or were harmed. It's not a simple matter, but like the title of that book, if we have an atlas of our heart, we can start to navigate these kind of murky, confusing places where our moral compass goes a little haywire. Okay, so this is where Schadenfreude is different from the wish for accountability. When we're longing for justice, if we see an abuser reap the consequences of their behavior, we may be feeling empathy for the abused and not merely anti-empathy for the abuser. With these recent understandings on issues like resentment, forgiveness, and Schadenfreude, we can gain a new upgrade to our inner GPS and a chance to move from resentment to resilience. The key is to realize that when these difficult feelings rise up in us, be they vengeful, resentful, or hateful, we can embrace the aspect of them which is a longing for justice. We can embrace the aspect of them which is a longing for justice. When we do so, we are strengthening our capacity for empathy and connection rather than shutting it down. So this is the choice you have. Based on what we know of how these instincts were preserved, based on what we know of what's happening in the brain, we have the choice. When these challenging things rise up in us, we can either think, behave in a way that erodes empathy and compassion, or we can think and behave in a way that gives rise to greater empathy and compassion. Why is that so important? This is not the part of your brain that just forgives at all costs, that says, oh, you've hurt others, you've abused people, you've tried to ruin society in total, you've set up fascist dictatorships and supported them, and welcome back to the fold, my friend. That's not what I'm talking about when I say empathy and compassion. I'm talking about the part of your brain that can see multiple perspectives. It can see this one, and just when you're about to get cognitive dissonance, it can entertain this one, and it can entertain this one, and it can see where each of those are coming from, and from that place, make the most creative solutions. These are the kind of solutions we're going to need in the radical world that we're facing if we're going to adapt to misfortune and change. We don't maintain access to this adaptive and compassionate core by tone policing ourselves, saying, don't be hateful, don't be resentful, it's better to forgive. We don't maintain access to that by tone policing, but rather by expanding our capacity for care. We care more deeply for ourselves, We care more deeply for those who are subject to abuse. And on our good days, this even allows us to see the humanity in the abusers while we are establishing good and healthy boundaries. And we allow this care to fuel us with the energy to take action. So in the last few minutes remaining, I want to do a little active meditation, a little active inquiry with you so that this isn't all just theoretical. Let's see if we can apply it. So think of something that brings alive a sense of resentment, hatred, anger, or ill will. It'll probably take a while, I know, for folks as enlightened as us. And if you don't have any of those, then please beam your enlightened energies so that with the hope that the rest of us can get it someday. So can you come up with one? Something that brings alive in you the sense of resentment or hatred or ill will. So then notice underneath, let's try that reframe and think the question your instincts are trying to ask is, what will be best for my community? What is it that I'm longing for? Are you longing for accountability? Are you longing for safety? Are you longing for fairness? If so, why? And if you practice this inquiry, you may begin to find that underneath these very strong roiling emotions that clench us up or make us lash out, is that desire to create a more beautiful world together. And so in your inquiry, with all that energy present, see if you can ask within, what actions can I take on behalf of my values? If you're concerned like I am about the situation in Ukraine, perhaps there aren't a lot of actions you can take, but you can donate to the International Rescue Committee. You can donate to Doctors Without Borders. You can keep supporting your representatives who are trying to act in ways that promote peace if possible. And feel as if this energy that might lead to destruction, that might lead to ostracizing or dehumanizing, can be put in service of your goal and your vision for making a better world possible. It doesn't solve the problem, but perhaps it helps us to upgrade our internal GPS so we know which direction to travel in. In closing, I want to read our opening words again. This spirit, to loose the fetters of injustice. Is this not the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see them naked to cover them, and to not hide yourself from your own kin? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Thank you so much for being here this morning and joining me on this convoluted and windy road from resentment to resilience.